The coffee arrived every morning at 7, and every morning at 8 it was taken away untouched. This had been happening for 4 months. Nora Vane knew because she was the one who brought it, and the one who took it away, and she had a practical mind that noticed patterns, the way a good seamstress notices where fabric pulls. Something was wrong with the seam. She had not yet decided whether it was her business to say so. She was the under-housekeeper at Ashbourne. Under-housekeeper was a title that meant she was responsible for everything Mrs. Fleet, the head housekeeper, did not wish to deal with personally, which in a house of this size and this particular variety of organized disorder was a great deal. Nora managed the linen. She managed the account books for the kitchen provisioning. She liaised with the cook when the cook and Mrs. Fleet were not speaking, which was 3 weeks out of every 4. She was 26 years old and had been in service since she was 16, and she had a gift for the quiet management of things that no one else wanted to manage. She had not intended to be the one who brought the Duke his coffee. That was a footman's job, and there were 3 footmen at Ashbourne, all of them young and adequate, and perfectly capable of carrying a tray up 1 flight of stairs without incident. But the footman assigned to the morning tray had sprained his wrist in November, and the second had been sent to his mother's sickbed, and the third was Hayes, who was 19 and had a terror of the Duke that expressed itself as a tendency to slop things. After the 3rd morning of slopped coffee, Mrs. Fleet had handed the tray to Nora and said, "You have steady hands and a steady head. Deal with it." Nora had steady hands and a steady head and had been dealing with things since she was 16. She took the tray. She had expected the Duke to be frightening. Everyone at Ashbourne expected the Duke to be frightening, because the Duke was Edward Calloway, 7th Duke of Ashbourne, and the 7th Duke was known in the county for 2 things: his fortune, which was considerable, and his silences, which were longer. He was 34. He had been Duke since he was 28, when his father died and left him a title, an estate, and a set of obligations that he had apparently decided to discharge by working 16 hours a day and speaking to no one who was not strictly necessary. He was not frightening. That was the first surprise. He was merely contained. There was a difference. Frightening men expanded into a room and made it smaller. The Duke contracted into it, pulling himself in, taking up only the space he could not avoid, as though he had learned somewhere that presence was a luxury he had no right to. He sat at his desk every morning when Nora arrived with the tray. He was always already at his desk. She had never seen him arrive at it. He simply existed there, in the grey early morning, in a coat that had been put on correctly, but not carefully, with papers spread in a particular order that she had learned, over 4 months, to replace exactly as she found them after dusting. The desk was in the East Library, which was where he worked. The West Library was for guests. The East Library was his, and it showed it. Not in mess. He was not a messy man, but in use. The books were read, not displayed. The margins had pencil in them. The papers on the desk were covered in a handwriting that was small and fast, and tilted slightly to the left, the handwriting of a man who thinks faster than he can write and is always catching up. He looked up when she came in. He always looked up. It was a small acknowledgement, barely a degree of movement, but it was consistent, and consistency, Nora had learned, was the Duke's primary language. "Thank you," he said. She set the tray on the stand beside the desk. The coffee was in a white pot, as he had specified, not silver. He had asked for the white pot on the first morning, and she had not known why, but had not asked, and she did not ask now. She dusted the shelves near the window. She replaced the books that had been left on the table. She straightened the blind that always pulled to one side in the morning. These were the things she did every morning while he worked, and he did not acknowledge them, and she did not need him to. She went to collect the tray. The coffee was untouched. The cup sat precisely where she had placed it, full to the brim, cool now, a faint skin forming on the surface. It had not been moved, not a finger's width. He had sat beside it for an hour and had not once lifted it to his lips. She put the cup back on the tray. She picked up the tray. She went to the door. Is the coffee unsatisfactory? It was the first thing he had said to her, beyond thank you, in 4 months. She stopped at the door, with the tray in her hands. I beg your pardon, Your Grace. The coffee. You look at it every morning when you collect it. You have an expression when you look at it that suggests a question. I am asking whether the coffee is unsatisfactory. Nora turned. He was looking at her from the desk, not with the flat, examining look she had seen him use on papers he was reviewing, with something else, something that was closer to curiosity. The coffee is prepared as specified, Your Grace. Fresh ground, medium dark, white pot, 7 o'clock. It is, as far as I can tell, satisfactory coffee. But, I beg your pardon? You said as far as you can tell, which implies you are not certain, which implies you think there may be something wrong with it that you cannot identify. She stood at the door with the tray. The coffee was cold on the tray. It occurred to her that this was, structurally, a peculiar conversation, and that the most efficient way to end it was to answer honestly. I was going to say, she said, that the coffee appears satisfactory, as far as I can tell, because I cannot actually tell, because you have not tasted it. He looked at her, she looked back, because she had steady hands and a steady head and had been dealing with things since she was 16, and looking at a duke was not the hardest thing she had done before breakfast. No, he said, I have not. For 4 months, she said. For 4 months. And yet you order it every morning. Yes, this was plainly the end of what he was willing to offer. She held the tray. She thought about 4 months of perfect coffee, going cold on a stand beside a desk, and then being carried back to the kitchen untouched. And she thought about the cook, who ground the beans herself, and took some pride in the result. And she thought about the particular uselessness of a thing done well for no purpose. Your Grace, she said, may I ask why? Why what? Why you order it, if you do not drink it? He was quiet, not a short quiet, the kind that means a person is thinking, a long quiet, the kind that means a person is deciding whether to speak. My father drank coffee, he said, every morning, at this desk. I grew up watching him drink it. When I came into the house, I ordered it because it was what was done here, at this desk, in the morning. I did not think about it. I simply ordered it. And then I discovered I do not like coffee. I have never liked coffee. I was not accustomed to mornings at this desk when my father was alive, and I did not know that I had formed a picture of the mornings here without ever having inhabited them, and when I inhabited them, the picture was wrong, and the coffee was the most specific part of the wrongness. He said all of this as though he were reading it from a document, evenly, without emphasis. She had noticed this about him over 4 months of mornings. He described things accurately, even things that were evidently not easy to describe, and he did it without asking for sympathy, which was a quality she found she respected. You could have cancelled the order, she said. I could have. Or asked for something else. Yes. Why didn't you? He looked at her again. The curiosity was still there, but there was something underneath it now, something she could not quite name. Because, he said, cancelling the coffee would have required me to think about why I ordered it in the first place, and I was not ready to think about that. So I let it come, and I let it sit, and I let it go cold, and you collected it every morning, and I watched you look at the cup when you did, and I wondered when you would ask. You have been waiting for me to ask. Waiting is the wrong word. Expecting. I expected it. You have the expression of a person who notices things and files them for later. I thought later might be this morning. Nora stood at the door with the cold coffee on the tray, and she thought about the expression she apparently wore when she looked at the cup, and she thought about a man who had been ordering a thing he did not want for 4 months because the wanting of it belonged to someone else, and she thought that under all the containedness and the long silences and the coat that had been put on correctly but not carefully, the Duke of Ashbourne was a man who was still learning the shape of a life he had not planned on living. "What would you like instead?" she said. He blinked. It was the first involuntary thing she had seen him do. Instead of coffee. If you were to order something in the morning that was for you rather than for the picture you had of this desk, what would it be? The question sat between them. He looked at it the way he looked at a document he had been given without context, trying to determine what it was asking. "Tea," he said, finally. "I prefer tea." "Then I will bring tea tomorrow," she said. "Shall I cancel the coffee order?" "Yes. I will tell Cook that the blend did not suit, and we are trying a different morning arrangement. She will not take it personally if I frame it correctly." "I thought the coffee was satisfactory," he said, and there was something in his voice that was almost, very nearly, the ghost of amusement. "The coffee is satisfactory. You are not the coffee's audience. Cook need not know that." She went out. She went down to the kitchen and told Cook that his Grace's morning preference had shifted and they were moving to tea, which was a straightforward thing she had said in a straightforward way, and Cook received it in the practical spirit in which it was offered, and the matter was settled in 3 minutes. She went back to her accounts. She thought, briefly, about a man who had spent 4 months ordering a cup of grief and not drinking it, and she thought that this was none of her business, and also that she had made it her business by asking, which was the thing she had done, and she would not undo it. She would bring tea in the morning. That was enough. We'll take a very short break. If you don't want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. The tea arrived the next morning at 7. Nora brought it in the white pot, because she had not asked about the pot, and it seemed safer to keep what had been specified. He looked at the pot when she set it down. He looked at it the way he had looked at her question the morning before. "You kept the white pot," he said. "I did not know whether the preference was for the pot or for the substance in it." "The pot was my father's preference. He liked the white because he said silver changed the flavor." "Does it change the flavor?" "I have no idea. I expect it is something my father believed, and I have never thought carefully about. Perhaps I prefer white pots. Perhaps I prefer them because they were his. I genuinely cannot tell you. Does it matter?" He looked at her. "I suppose not. The tea is in the pot. I will drink the tea." He drank the tea. She could see it from the window where she was adjusting the blind. He picked up the cup and drank, and it was such a small thing, such a plain, ordinary small thing, and it was the first time in 4 months that the morning had worked the way mornings were supposed to work. She did not comment. She was not a woman who commented on things that did not require commentary. She dusted the shelf and replaced the books and straightened the blind and went out with the empty pot, and the morning was done. Over the following weeks, a pattern established itself. She brought the tea. He drank it. She did her work. He did his. Neither of them spoke, unless there was a practical reason to speak. But the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of two people in separate rooms who happened to occupy the same space. It was the silence of two people who were aware of each other. She noticed things about him that she had not noticed before, or that she had noticed and filed without thinking about them. She noticed that he worked in a particular order: correspondence first, then accounts, then whatever project he was currently occupied with, which had been, over the 4 months she had observed it, agricultural drainage, the estate tenancies, and most recently, a set of papers about the village school in Ashbourne Village, which had been without a schoolmaster since September. She noticed that he ate very little at meals, according to the kitchen reports, but that he was not a neglectful eater. He ate what was put in front of him, and he ate it tidily. He simply did not ask for much. She noticed that he thanked her every morning with the same word in the same tone, and that the consistency was not coldness, but something more like reliability, the way a clock strikes the same note at the same hour, not because it is indifferent to the hour, but because that is what it is made to do. She noticed, one morning in December, that the papers on his desk had changed. He was still working on the school documents, but there were new ones alongside them: a surveyor's report, and a builder's estimate, and several letters she did not read, but could see were long. "May I ask," she said, from the window where she was replacing a curtain ring that had come loose, "whether the school in the village is being rebuilt?" He looked up from the papers. Repaired. The roof and the western wall. It should have been done 2 years ago, but the previous steward did not prioritize it. The previous steward did not prioritize a great many things, she said, and then stopped, because she was an under-housekeeper talking about the estate management to the Duke, which was not her place. "No," he said. "He did not. What things specifically are you referring to?" She hesitated. "Miss Vane, you have an expression when you stop yourself from saying something that is quite as informative as when you say it. What things specifically?" "The tenants in the north cottages have roofs that need mending. 3 of them. I know this because Mary Dawes, who brings the laundry up on Tuesdays, told Mrs. Fleet in October, and Mrs. Fleet did not consider it within the house's scope, and I noted it in case it was useful to know." He was quiet. "The north cottages. Which ones?" "Dawes, Hartley, and Prentice. The Dawes roof has been a problem for at least 2 years from what Mary says. The Hartley one is newer. The Prentice one, she said, was only starting, so perhaps it can be managed before winter does the worst." He wrote something down. He wrote it on a separate piece of paper, not on whatever he had been working on, with the quick, tilted handwriting that was always catching up with his thoughts. "Is there anything else Mrs. Fleet has not considered within the house's scope?" he said. "Possibly. I would need to think about it. When you have thought about it, tell me." "Your Grace, I am the under-housekeeper. I am not. You notice things and you file them. I have 4 months of evidence of this. The filing is a useful skill, and I intend to make use of it." He looked back at his papers. "When you have thought about it." Nora went back to the curtain ring. She finished replacing it. She went out. She thought, on the stairs, that the conversation had moved sideways from where it began, and that she was not entirely certain where it had ended up, and that she would need to think carefully about what she had been asked before she responded to it. She thought carefully. She made a list. The list was longer than she had expected, which perhaps should not have surprised her, because Nora Vane had been noticing things and filing them since she was 16, and a list that had been building for 4 months in a large estate was going to be substantial. She brought the list on a Thursday. She brought it tucked into her apron because she was not going to arrive at the East Library with a document in her hand as though she were his secretary, which she was not. She brought it because he had asked, and because she had thought about it, and she was not a woman who was asked a question and declined to answer it. She waited until the tea was poured, and the curtains were adjusted, and the books were replaced, and then she stood by the door with the list in her apron and said, "You asked me to tell you when I had thought about it. I did." She took out the list. She set it on the corner of the desk, folded. 7 items, 4 estate matters, which your steward should probably have on his own list, but which I will leave to your judgment. 2 household matters that I have dealt with or am dealing with, and you do not need to know about. 1 matter that is not clearly in anyone's scope, and which I was not sure whether to include. Include it. The schoolmistress in the village. I know you have the school under repair. She has been managing without an assistant since May. There are 41 children in the school. She is one woman of 53, and she is managing, and she is doing it well. But she told the vicar's wife last month that she was very tired, and the vicar's wife told Cook, and Cook told me. I include it because you are rebuilding the school, and I thought you would wish to know the condition of the person in it. He unfolded the list. He read it in the way he read everything, completely, once, without visibly reacting, then read it again. Then he set it down. "How long have you been doing this?" he said. "Noting things?" "Since I was in my first position. I was 14 when I went into service. My mother told me that the difference between a woman who is always employed and a woman who is not is that one of them sees what the house needs before the house needs to ask, and the other waits to be told. I decided I would rather be the first kind. You have been the first kind for 12 years. Yes, Your Grace. And in those 12 years, has anyone thought to ask you what you see?" She considered the question. "No," she said, "not formally. I am asking formally. I notice that, Your Grace. I am not entirely certain what to do with it. Add it to your list of things to think about." The corner of his mouth moved. It was the same fraction she had seen before, the almost amused fraction, the closest he came to the visible evidence of an interior life. She was beginning to understand that for the Duke of Ashbourne, that fraction was a great deal. She went out. She thought about it on the stairs. She thought about it in the linen room, and the account books, and the Tuesday morning when Cook was not speaking to Mrs. Fleet, and Nora was between them, like a translator. She thought about a man who read her list twice and asked how long she had been doing it, and she thought about what it meant that nobody had asked before. She did not think about what she was not going to think about, which was the fact that the Duke had a fine face when it was not being carefully blank, and that the mornings in the East Library had become, without her quite deciding they should, the part of the day she was sharpest in. She did not think about that. She had steady hands and a steady head and 12 years of knowing which things were her business and which were not. January came. The roof of the school was mended. The north cottage roofs were mended. The assistant for the schoolmistress was arranged. A young woman from the village who had been teaching her younger siblings their letters and who had, apparently, the aptitude for it. Nora learned this, not from the Duke, but from the pattern of the papers, which she could not read but could observe, and from the conversations below stairs, where things that happened on the estate arrived in the kitchen eventually. She filed the information and said nothing. On a Tuesday in January, she came into the East Library with the tea and found him standing at the window rather than at his desk. This had not happened before. He was standing at the window looking at the park, and the park was grey and bare, and nothing was happening in it, and he was looking at it as though it had something to tell him. She set the tray down. She began to dust. "Miss Vane, Your Grace, may I ask you something?" She turned. He was still at the window. He had not turned away from it. "Yes," she said. "Do you find this position satisfying?" The question arrived without warning, the way his questions arrived, direct and without the usual social approach. She thought about it properly, because he deserved a proper answer, and because she did not give any other kind. "Yes," she said, "more than previous positions. There is more that needs doing here, and more latitude to do it. And if you had more latitude still, I would use it. To what end?" "To whatever end the house needed. That is what I mean by latitude, not authority for its own sake. The ability to act when action is needed, without waiting 3 conversations before anything happens." He turned from the window. He looked at her with the full attention she had learned was not the uncomfortable thing it looked like, but simply the way he looked at things he was thinking about seriously. "Mrs. Fleet is leaving in the spring," he said. "Her sister in Bath is ill. She has been with me 7 months and she wishes to go, and I have said she may, and I am looking for her replacement." "I see," said Nora. "I am telling you because I should like you to take the position." She stood with the duster in her hand, and the thought arrived very quietly and settled without drama. She had not thought about it. She had not hoped for it, or angled for it, or done anything, except her work, and the filing, and the list she had brought on a Thursday. And here it was, offered plainly, in the way he offered everything, without performance, and without embellishment. "Your Grace," she said, "you have had me in this house 4 months. 5, and I have more information about what you see and how you think in those 5 months than I have about most people I have known for years. You brought me a list of 7 things. 6 of them were correct observations that required action. The 7th was the schoolmistress, and the schoolmistress now has an assistant. You hired the assistant because of my list. I hired the assistant because a woman of 53 was managing 41 children alone and was tired, and you noticed and told me, and I acted on it. That is how a house should work. I have not had a housekeeper who understood that. I should like one." She looked at the duster in her hand. She looked at the East Library, which she knew now the way she knew good cloth, by the grain and the weight and the way it behaved in different light. She looked at the man at the window who had drunk his tea every morning for 2 months and had not once let it go cold. "I have one question," she said. "Ask it. Why did you wait 5 months?" He looked at her. "I did not wait. I was observing. Observing whether I was competent. Observing whether you were honest. Competence is common. Honesty about what a thing actually needs is not." She thought about this. "The coffee," she said. "The coffee was the beginning." "Yes. You did not tell me the coffee was bad when it was not bad. You told me what was actually true, which was that you could not judge the coffee because it had not been tasted. That is a precise and correct answer, and it is not the answer most people give. Most people would have said the coffee was fine and hoped you wouldn't ask again. Yes, you gave me the accurate answer and bore the risk that I would be displeased by it. I was not particularly worried about displeasing you." "No, that was also apparent. It is a quality I find useful in a housekeeper." The fraction of amusement was there again, among other positions. Nora set the duster down on the shelf. She looked at him steadily, and he looked back. This was a new thing, this looking. She had not looked at him this directly before. or he had not looked at her, or the looking had not been the same kind. Something had changed in the angle of it, and she was clear-eyed enough to name it, and careful enough not to name it aloud. "I will take the position," she said, "on one condition." His eyebrows moved, marginally. "A condition. That when you are ordering something you do not actually want, you will say so, rather than letting it come cold to a stand every morning for 4 months. A household runs on accurate information. If its employer is giving false information to himself, the household cannot correct for it. That," he said, "is an extremely precise framing of what happened with the coffee. It is an accurate framing, which you value, which I value. Your condition is accepted." He paused. "I should also tell you that the arrangement will involve a salary adjustment and the use of the housekeeper's suite, which is currently occupied by Mrs. Fleet's trunks, but which will be cleared by April. I had expected an adjustment. The trunks are not a concern." "No, I thought not." She picked up the duster. She went back to work, because the work was still there, and it needed doing. He went back to his desk, because the papers were still there, and they needed reading. She dusted the far shelves. He read his correspondence. Neither of them spoke, but the silence was a different silence again, shifted by another degree, and she was aware of him in a way that was not quite the same as being aware of the room, and she thought that the list of things she was not going to think about had acquired a new item. She had steady hands and a steady head. She would manage. The spring came. Mrs. Fleet departed for Bath with her trunks and her good wishes and a recommendation from the Duke that was warm enough to surprise her. Nora moved into the housekeeper's suite, which was plain and functional and faced the garden, and she looked at it and thought that it would do very well. She reorganized the household accounts. She reorganized the linen schedule. She had 3 conversations with Cook that were the most productive conversations Cook had apparently had with a housekeeper in 5 years, because Nora listened and then asked what Cook actually needed, rather than what Cook had been previously offered. She went to the East Library every morning at 7 with the tea. He drank it. The mornings ran the way mornings were supposed to run. On a morning in April, she came in, and he was not at his desk. He was at the window again, looking at the park, which was now green and not grey, and had several things happening in it, including the gardener's boy doing something complicated to the rose bed that she would look into later. "Good morning, Your Grace," she said, and set the tray down. "Miss Vane, look at this." She went to the window. He moved slightly to make room for her, which was the first time they had stood in the same part of the room, for any reason other than the exchange of trays. Through the window, the park was doing what parks do in April, which is be unreasonably green and remind everyone that the winter was actually over.
"What am I looking at?" she said. "I have been thinking about a conversation we had in January. You said you would use more latitude to whatever end the house needed."
"I have been thinking about what the house needs. And what does it need? A kitchen garden that is larger than the current one, because we are under-provisioning the kitchen and overpaying the market, and the difference could be corrected by using the south paddock properly. A better relationship with the village, which has been standoffish with the estate since my father's time, for reasons I am still determining. And," he stopped. "And?" she said. "I am aware that what I am about to say is not precisely a housekeeping matter. Say it anyway." He looked at the park. "The house is very quiet. I grew up in a quiet house, and I am accustomed to quiet, and I am not certain I had ever thought about whether I preferred it or simply accepted it, I have been thinking about it more recently. Recently meaning since January. Roughly. She looked at the rose bed, where the gardener's boy was now doing something Nora had serious doubts about. She would speak to the gardener. "Your Grace," she said, "I am going to say something that is not a housekeeping matter either." "Say it." "A house is quiet when the person at the center of it has decided that quiet is what is available. You have organized your life in this house around what was already here when you arrived. The desk, the coffee, the patterns your father kept, the silence your father kept. You have been inhabiting a house you did not choose, rather than building the house you would choose. The kitchen garden is not a housekeeping matter. It is evidence that you are beginning to choose." He was quiet. The park was green. The gardener's boy did the questionable thing to the rose bed. "I should speak to the gardener about the boy," she said. "Yes, what is he doing?" "Cutting the new wood. You do not cut the new wood in April. You wait until it is established." "Ah." A pause. "Miss Vane, Your Grace. The thing I was about to say, that is not a housekeeping matter. Yes. I find that the house is quieter on the mornings you are not in it than on the mornings you are. This is accurate information, which you have said you value. I am giving it to you." She looked at the rose bed. The gardener's boy was now looking at the rose bed uncertainly, which was an improvement. "That is accurate information," she said. "Thank you." "You are welcome." Neither of them said anything else. She went to collect the tray, which she did not strictly need to collect yet, because the tea was not finished. She collected it anyway, because it was a thing to do with her hands, and she had very steady hands. She went to the door. She turned back. "Your Grace, for what it is worth, the mornings I am not in this library are also quieter for me than the mornings I am." He looked at her. She looked back. "That is also accurate information," he said. "Thank you. You are welcome." She went out. She went down the stairs. She spoke to the gardener about the boy, and the gardener listened and was not offended because she framed it correctly, and the rose bed was saved. She thought about accurate information and quiet mornings and the particular quality of silence that is different from emptiness. And she thought that a list had been growing in her since January that she had not yet written down, and that some items on lists are not intended to be filed. He asked her in June, in the East Library, in the morning, while she was replacing the curtain ring that kept coming loose because the thread was wrong, and she needed to replace the thread. He asked her in the way he asked everything, directly and without the usual approach. She said yes in the way she said everything, which was accurately and after thinking about it properly, and they stood in the East Library with the morning light coming through the window she had adjusted, and the tray on the stand that had once held cold coffee, and the shelves of books with their margined pencil, and neither of them performed for the occasion, because neither of them was that kind of person. "One thing," she said. "Name it." "The coffee. I should like to understand it properly. Not the reason you ordered it, which you have told me. I should like to understand what you meant when you said you were not ready to think about it." He looked at the window. "My father sat at that desk for 30 years. I watched him sit there my whole life, from childhood, from visiting, from the years I came back and the house was his. When it became mine, I sat at the desk, and I ordered what he ordered, and I did not think about it, because thinking about it would have meant knowing that the desk was mine and not his, and I was not ready to know that. And now the desk is mine, the tea is mine, the kitchen garden will be mine, and the village relationship, and the quiet house that is becoming less quiet." He looked at her. "The choosing is mine." She folded her hands in front of her, the steady hands that had been dealing with things since she was 16. Yes, she said, it is, including you. You are not choosing me, Your Grace. I accepted your proposal. There is a distinction. The fraction of amusement was fully a smile now. She had been watching it build for 6 months, and it had arrived. You are going to correct me for the rest of my life, he said. Accurately, and when warranted, she said, which you have said you value, which I value. Then we understand each other. They were married in August, at the small church in Willowbrook Village, with the household and the tenants and the schoolmistress, and her new assistant in the pews. The Duke was precise and composed throughout. Nora was steady, as she had always been. The breakfast after was in the great dining room, which had been opened for the occasion. It was the first time the great dining room had been opened in 4 years, and the household received this with the particular, muted joy of people who have been keeping a house and are glad to see it used. The kitchen garden was already under construction in the south paddock, the plans drawn up and the beds laid. The village was proving less standoffish than the Duke had feared, largely because the schoolmistress had said a word in the right direction, and the right direction had said a word back, and the whole thing had settled without drama, because that was how Nora preferred things to settle. The East Library was still the center of the house, the desk covered in its papers, the margins still penciled, the books still read and not displayed. The tray came every morning at 7, the white pot, the tea. She brought it. He drank it. She did her work. He did his. The mornings ran the way mornings were supposed to run. On the first morning after the wedding, she came in, and he was at the desk, as he always was, and she set the tray down and said, "Good morning," and he said, "Good morning," and she adjusted the blind that always pulled to one side. "The ring on that curtain will need replacing," she said. "Again, I am going to source a better thread." "Yes," he said. She went to the shelves. She began to dust. "Nora," he said. It was the first time. She turned. "Good morning," he said again, and this time the 2 words were different, carrying what 2 words can carry when they are chosen rather than habitual. She looked at him across the morning library, the books and the papers and the tray between them, and she thought about a cup of cold coffee that had been the beginning of everything, and she thought that the house was choosing itself now, room by room, morning by morning, one accurate piece of information at a time. "Good morning," she said. She went back to the shelves. He went back to his papers. The morning settled around them, quiet and warm and entirely itself, and it was enough, and it was theirs, and it was precisely what it was. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.